Sinbad stood on a shore heaped with gold, ambergris, and uncut jewels, and with the bones of every sailor who had ever washed up there before him. Above rose sheer cliffs no man could climb. Behind churned a sea no ship could re-enter. The treasure was endless, and it was worthless, because every soul who reached this beach had starved to death upon it. And now it was Sinbad's turn. From the world of the Arabian Nights, told by lamplight on Nightfall Tales, the sixth voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. Old now and rich beyond need, Sinbad had truly meant to stay on dry land forever. But the sea had one more trap left for him, a coast of treasure that was also a tomb, and a river that ran into the black heart of a mountain. Dim the lamp. Years had passed since the old man of the sea, and Sinbad had grown old and comfortable and wise enough to know better. His friends and family begged him to be content. He had wealth enough for 10 lifetimes, and he had cheated death more times than any man living. But the old longing came back as it always did, quiet at first, then unbearable, until the smell of the harbor was louder in his blood than any voice of reason. So Sinbad traveled overland to a distant port, joined a merchant ship bound for far waters, and put to sea one more time, telling himself, as he always did, that this voyage would be the calm one. For a while it was. They sailed from island to island, trading and prospering, and the old sailor began to think that perhaps, this once, the sea would simply let him be. He should have known better. The sea had never once let Sinbad go without trying to keep him. The change came without warning. The wind turned, the sky went the color of iron, and a current seized the ship like a hand and dragged it where no helm could steer. The captain came down from the wheel with his turban in his hands and tears on his face, and he told the merchants the truth. They had been swept into the one stretch of sea from which no vessel had ever returned. Ahead, a great black mountain rose straight out of the water, and the current ran straight at its foot, faster and faster, and there was nothing any of them could do but pray. The ship struck the rocks at the mountain's base and broke apart. Some men drowned in the surf. The rest were flung, half dead, onto a narrow shore at the bottom of the cliffs. When Sinbad dragged himself up out of the water and looked around at the place the sea had finally brought him to, he understood at once that drowning might have been the kinder fate. The beach was a graveyard. Everywhere Sinbad looked lay the wreckage of ships, hulls and masts and rotted rope from every nation, piled and tangled where the current had thrown them across the years. And among the wrecks lay the dead, bones bleached white, skeletons still wrapped in the rags of fine clothes, the crews of 100 lost voyages who had washed up exactly as Sinbad had. But the strangest horror of the place was its wealth. The shore glittered. Great lumps of gray ambergris lay drying in the sun. Veins of jewels ran through the rock. Pearls and rubies and emeralds were scattered in the sand like ordinary pebbles. More treasure in one place than Sinbad had seen in all his voyages combined. And not one of the dead men around him had been able to spend a single coin of it. The cliffs were unclimbable. The sea would not take a swimmer back. This was a place that made men rich and then watched them die. Sinbad sat down among the bones and the gold and waited to learn how long it would take. The survivors had saved a little food from the wreck, and they divided it, and they made it last as long as men can make a few days' food last when there is no more coming. But the end was never in doubt. One by one, Sinbad's companions weakened and lay down and did not rise again. And each time a man died, Sinbad, the oldest of them, and somehow still the strongest in will, dug a grave for him in the sand with his own hands and laid him in it, because he could not bear to leave them lying among the others' bones. He had buried shipmates before, but never like this. Slowly, in order, knowing the arithmetic of it, knowing that with every grave he dug, the food stretched a little further for those still breathing, and that he was bearing his way toward being the last man alive on the shore of riches. At last that day came. Sinbad stood alone among the wrecks and the dead and the useless treasure, the only living thing on the whole cursed coast, with almost nothing left to eat and no reason left to hope. Almost. Sinbad would not simply lie down and add his bones to the pile. If he was going to die, he decided, he would die trying. And so, instead of waiting, he began to explore the foot of the cliffs. And there, where the rock met the sand, he found something the dying men before him had been too despairing to use: a river. A wide channel of fresh water flowed down across the shore and ran straight into a dark opening in the base of the mountain, vanishing under the stone. It came from somewhere. It went somewhere, And water that goes in, Sinbad reasoned, must somewhere come out. It was a desperate, half-mad hope. The opening was a black throat in the rock, and no one knew what waited inside. Rapids, a dead end, a drop into the dark. But certain death lay behind him on the beach, and only a chance of death lay ahead in the mountain. And Sinbad had spent his whole life choosing the chance. He set to work. From the wreckage all around him, the ribs and planks of 100 ships, he built himself a raft and lashed it tight with rotted rope and loaded it with as many of the jewels as it would bear. When the raft was ready, Sinbad pushed it to the water's edge, climbed aboard, and let the river take him into the mountain. The light shrank behind him to a coin, to a spark, and then was gone, and the dark closed over him completely. A blackness so total he could not see his own hands, could not tell if his eyes were open or shut. The roof of the tunnel pressed lower and lower until he had to lie flat on the raft to keep from being scraped off it, the cold stone passing inches above his face. He lost all sense of time, hours or days that he could not say. He had no food left, no water but the river, no light, no sound but the rush of the current carrying him deeper into the heart of the world. Hunger and exhaustion dragged at him, and at last, somewhere in that endless dark, Sinbad's strength simply gave out. He stopped fighting. He lay back on the jewels he could not see and let the river carry his body wherever it willed, and slipped down into a sleep he did not expect to wake from. Sinbad woke to sunlight on his face and the sound of human voices. For a long moment, he could not believe either. The raft had carried him clear through the mountain and out the far side, into the open air of a wide green country, and there it had run aground in the shallows of a broad river, lined with fields and palms. A crowd of people had gathered on the bank, astonished at the sight of a half-dead old man drifting out of the wilderness on a raft heaped with raw jewels. They pulled him ashore and warmed him and fed him, and could scarcely understand his story when at last he had the strength to tell it, that he had come from the other side of the mountain, from the shore of the dead, down the black river no one had ever ridden and lived. They told him where he was, the kingdom of Serendib, a land of spice forests and ruby mountains, as far from Baghdad as a man could sail. He had not merely survived. The river had carried him to one of the richest and most beautiful kingdoms on earth. The people of Serendib brought Sinbad before their king, and the king listened to the whole tale. The wreck, the shore of bones, the buried crew, the river into the dark, and was so moved and amazed that he ordered the story written down in letters of gold and kept in the royal library. He marveled at the jewels on Sinbad's raft and admitted that his own treasury, rich as it was, held nothing finer. He gave Sinbad rooms in his palace and treated him as an honored guest. And when at last Sinbad asked leave to return home, the king did not merely grant it. He loaded a ship with gifts and sent Sinbad back to Baghdad as his own envoy, bearing a letter and presents for the Caliph Harun al-Rashid himself. And so Sinbad came home once more, richer than he had left, carried back from a tomb of treasure by a river through the dark, an old man who had outlived every crew that ever sailed with him. He swore, of course, that he would never sail again. But the sea keeps its own counsel, and it would call Sinbad out one last time. That is the 6th voyage of Sinbad the Sailor, the shore where treasure and death lay side by side, the crew he buried one grave at a time, and the black river he rode through the heart of a mountain into the light. They told it by lamplight to remember that no riches are worth anything to the dead, and that the man who keeps moving when others lie down is the one the river carries home. If you have sailed this far into the night with him, stay for the last of it. There is one final voyage left, the strangest journey of all, the one Sinbad never meant to take. Subscribe, light the lamp again after nightfall, and we will sail the 7th and final voyage of Sinbad together.